My name is Aaron William Moore. I'm a modern historian of China and Japan, but I also work in modern literature. Welcome to my exp. One of the reasons why it's useful to look at the diaries and overall life writings of ordinary soldiers as opposed to military or political leaders is it helps us understand how people like us got involved in supporting modern warfare. And this does not mean that we should be thinking about diaries as some kind of window into the soul or a unique perspective on truth, but rather the linguistic tools people used to get them through the conflict. Now, of course, many people will be simply repeating what they've heard elsewhere. It could be propaganda, it could be something given to them by a commanding officer, or in some cases even a parent or a loved one. But what we often see within personal accounts by combat soldiers is an attempt to craft a language that feels right and accurate and truthful to them as they're experiencing the chaos of a battlefield. What that shows us is that people are pretty capable of reinterpreting all of these powerful voices and messages that they get from the state or from the mass media or from the broader society and culture. And that allows us to talk meaningfully about individual responsibility. That does not mean, for example, that every person has total freedom in self-expression. The toolkit they receive is a byproduct of the ways in which they're educated and the ways in which they grow up. So when we look at a diary, particularly by someone who isn't very famous, who isn't thinking about posterity when they write, and isn't trying to craft some masterpiece, but simply writing down as accurately as they can what is going on around them and trying to give it some form of coherence, what we can do then with that document is illuminate many of the institutions and practices and indeed technologies and media that made that whole diary possible. Opening the diary is like opening the lens of a telescope and looking out into a broader world of, for example, how they were taught to capture factual information in a document, where you are in the world in terms of geography, what the weather is like, how many soldiers are there, how many bullets do you have, how much food did you eat, how many miles did you march, where is the enemy, how many times did you engage with them. I can go on and on and on. The diary itself is not just for the author a soulless delineation of fact. It's also a narrative that feels truthful to them. So that means they may be drawing from reportage to expose hidden evils in the world, or show the heroism of their comrades, and that means that we have a much better idea of how truth is constructed in a document, rather than simply say, well, the author may have thought it was true or they may have not thought it was true. Ordinary people are a little more guileless than, say, professional authors, and so looking at the ways that ordinary people write, we have a very good idea of what kind of documents were in circulation at the time, what kind of propaganda seemed to have been working, and what propaganda they may have been ignoring, or questioning, interrogating, critiquing. And the more we get to the bottom of that, the more we can understand why people were committed to fighting, or why in some cases they give up on war as a noble pursuit. It can seem a bit curious that I would describe something so innocuous as a diary as something that's very dangerous. But think of it this way. If you have a document that you believe is private, that is truthful, and reflects who you are as a person, then anything you write in that can potentially convince you to take a course of action that might be violent either to yourself or others. It can lead you down a path of committing what would later be called a war crime. It could put you in harm's way. It could lead you to make a decision like signing up for the army in the midst of a losing war. So the diary itself, because so many people accept them as truthful accounts, then becomes a very perilous space. If you're getting messages from the mass media that encourage men to define masculinity in terms of violence, and you write that down in your diary account, and you accept that diary account as a reflection of who you are, then you are convincing yourself to take that course of action. I decided to combine my analysis of diaries using Chinese, Japanese, and American soldiers during World War II in a way that's probably best explained through a short narrative. So I began with Japanese soldiers, and one of the reasons for this was that when I was living in Japan in the 1990s, there was a wave of publications coming out and famous court cases involving Japanese soldiers who had made claims against other people, and then they were being sued in libel and slander cases. And so they would provide diaries as evidence of what they were saying. And that fascinated me, so I started reading a lot of these accounts. I realized that I wanted to hear more about what their enemies were saying. The war between China and Japan begins in 1937. And what I found was that the Chinese soldiers were writing in a very similar way to how the Japanese were writing. And I had an intuitive suspicion that Americans were doing the same thing. I strongly suspected that I would find Americans quite capable of self-sacrifice, of listening to authorities, and making the same kinds of dangerous decisions that Japanese and Chinese soldiers were making, and that is precisely what I found. There are some differences and some exceptions, but largely ordinary people in China and Japan and the United States were able to sacrifice themselves for a kind of collective endeavor of committing mass acts of violence. And so part of it was me as an American confronting my own nation, my own culture's capacity for doing much the same things as the Japanese and the Chinese were doing in a period of total war. I have a diary by a Chinese officer named Liu Jiaqi. It was actually published in October 1938 in a city called Wuhan. At that time, Wuhan was under heavy attack by the Japanese, and its author, Liu Jiaqi, was already dead. Liu, even though he's a commanding officer and he graduated from one of the top military academies in China, was full of doubts. He didn't have confidence. And he had to confront the possibility that China was going to lose the war and that he was going to personally fail as an officer. So he writes, "The officers and men in this division are not making any efforts in building our outer defenses, and more than a few cannot follow the basic regulations. I am deeply concerned about this. I'm good at cultivating a spirit of meticulousness during a period of peace, but once we get our orders, it is not such an easy thing to do. From here on out, regarding our fighting spirit, if we are not resolved to die in battle, it is going to be extremely difficult to achieve victory. The officers and men in the division are spineless. Our system of punishment and reward isn't clear, and I'm truly concerned about our battle against the Japanese." So Liu goes straight to the battlefield and he fights. And then he's machine gunned by the Japanese and he dies. And it's only when revolutionary Maoism is finally gone in China that they're able to rename the road in Wuhan after Liu Jiaqi. You can still visit it today. But it shows you that the memory of these sacrifices that men like Liu Jiaqi made were extremely political in post-war China. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure how many people in China even remember his name today.